The draft is officially complete Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I watched an embarrassing amount of the draft. I watched it on Thursday, I watched it on Friday, and I watched it part of the day on Saturday. And in fact, when I got done with work on Friday, my 13-year-old, I had told him, hey, we can go anywhere you want and do anything you want on Friday evening, right? We had a busy week. Two of my kids were down in Orlando with my wife. They were doing an extracurricular sort of school event. And I said to my 13-year-old, I'm like, okay, it's just you and me this weekend, bud. Anywhere you want to go. And I'm not sure I've been prouder. He said, Dad, I want to go watch the start of the second round of the NFL draft, and I just want to sit at Buffalo Wild Wings and have food there and watch the NFL draft. And the numbers came out. And, I feel like every year the NFL draft gets bigger. And let me explain a couple of things about this. When I wrote, my first book that I published, Dixieland Delight, where you went around, I did, to all 12 at the time SEC football stadiums, wrote about why college football was so important in sort of the world of the South. And that book came out, did really well. Thanks to everybody out there who read it. It's now been like 13 or 14 years ago, by the way, that book came out, which is wild for me to think about, just how many years it's been. I didn't have any kids when I wrote the Dixieland Delight book. And now I've got a 13-year-old, so that kind of puts into perspective how long that's been. The next book that I wanted to write, and I've talked about this some with Jeff Schwartz, who is a weekly guest. It's where I met Jeff. The next book I wanted to write was about the NFL draft, and in particular the Combine, because I saw it as the perfect bridge for those of us who love college football and also love the NFL. The draft is the bridge that connects those two sports. And if you listen to this radio show regularly, you know that we are football crazy. We spend an insane amount of time talking about football on this show, both college football and the NFL. I'm a wild fan of both. And I said, hey, I've got this great idea. I'm going to spend several months, which I did, training alongside of all of these potential NFL draftees. And so they have a training facility here in my hometown of Nashville called D1 Sports. It's owned by Will Bartholomew. He has got centers all over the country. But every year they bring in a bunch of college guys who are training to get ready for the Combine. And that is, you are training to be the best you possibly can be at the 40. How many times can you bench press 225 pounds? What about the shuttle drills? All of these different aspects. I did every single thing, basically, that these college kids did as they got ready for the Combine, just in a much less athletic fashion. But I wanted to embed myself in that experience to see what it felt like. And I wrote an entire book, and I went to publishers. I could probably get this book published by now, by the way, because I'm a bigger name than I was then. But I went to publishers, and I said, I got this great idea. I said, the NFL draft every year gets more and more popular. People care about it more and more. And the New York City publisher said, we're not really sure that there's a market for an NFL draft book. We'd rather you write another college football book. So that's how I ended up writing my second book on Rocky Top that was published, because they didn't believe there was enough interest in the NFL draft to actually sell copies of a book like that. By the way, I've got that entire book written. I really do believe that it would do fabulously well, probably being released now, because the draft has only continued to grow in popularity. And let me contextualize how popular Thursday night's NFL draft was. Nearly twice as many people watched the NFL draft on Thursday night as watched the actual games of the NBA Finals. Think about that for a minute. The NFL is so popular that people would rather watch a draft for the NFL than the actual games themselves in the NBA. And not just rather watch, nearly 2-1. The other thing, This is the first year ever that the NFL draft has outrated the Oscars. Millions of more people watched the NFL draft than watched the Oscars this year, something that has never happened in the history of television before. And as I was watching the draft on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and as I was sitting at the Buffalo Wild Wings, we're not even getting any advertising money from them. This is just what I was doing. Sitting at great weather, sitting at a high top table outside watching the draft. I was thinking to myself, why is the draft uniquely? Last year was the highest rated draft of all time. And if you remember last year's draft, it was during the middle of COVID. Nobody could go anywhere. It was the first real sporting event we had had in forever other than WrestleMania. And I was thinking to myself, why is this year's draft now the second highest rated draft of all time? Why are people, when everybody is abandoning sports and regular television in such a degree, why is the draft continue to get more popular? And look, I don't think everything is perfect about the Thursday, Friday, Saturday draft, but I've been a draftnik, a nerd for a long time when it came to the draft because I love that bridge from college to the NFL. But what would it be that is making the last 2 years the most watched draft of all time? And you know, I was sitting around thinking about this a lot over the weekend. And I think the reason why the draft continues to explode in popularity is because it is the quintessential American dream brought to life. There's a lot of criticism out there of sports. But when you watch the draft, what do you see? A celebration of success. Every single kid, and I call them kids because I'm getting older now. I'm 42. If you're 20 years younger than me, you feel like a kid. Every single kid that gets drafted, they're there, almost all of them, with their family. It is an American success story. We have guys who may not have very much at all overnight becoming multimillionaires. It is the sporting version of a lottery ticket being cashed time after time after time. And you know what? I don't get tired of it. I don't get tired of watching all of these kids who have worked so hard to put themselves into this position suddenly seeing their dreams realized, where if they're first rounders, they can walk down and get to hug Roger Goodell on the stage. But if they're second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh rounders, they're still managing something that almost no one is able to accomplish. Whatever it is, 254 kids get drafted every year in the NFL. 7 rounds. It's a tiny pinprick of the number of kids that start off playing football somewhere, that play high school, that play in college. And there is something, I think, captivating about that experience. I also think the NFL sells hope better than any sport in America. And the draft is hope personified. Because you believe that you can see the future of your team and that the future of your team can change with one player. And that really isn't the case most of the time. But the NFL, unlike Major League Baseball and the NHL and certainly the NBA, your team can stink one year and they can make the playoffs the next year. And then they can make the playoffs and they can stink the year after. In other words, the range of potential outcomes for every NFL team is so much more substantial than most of the range for other pro sports teams that, unlike the other drafts, you can actually sit down and watch the NFL draft and think to yourself, hey, if this quarterback that we're drafting in the top 15 is really good, we're going to make the playoffs 8 of the next 10 years. And you can even think, hey, if you're the Texans fan, maybe Davis Mills. If you're the Vikings, maybe Kellen Mond. If you're a Bucs fan, maybe Kyle Trask. Because of guys like Tom Brady, who have been relatively low draft picks that have ascended to such excellence, you really might be, if you squint the right way, looking into the future. And I don't see it getting less popular. Even in an era when everybody wants to say, oh, the reason people don't watch the Oscars is because less people are watching television. And people say about the NBA Finals, well, yeah, they're the lowest rated finals ever, but that's because less people are watching television. How does the NFL break that trend? How does the NFL in the past 2 years, you could say last year you had COVID, but in the last 2 years, the NFL has had its 2 most watched drafts of all time. And it's become trendy to pile on and rip the NFL and everything else. But I think the NFL, of all the leagues out there, college and pro pretty much, handled COVID better than anybody. They didn't change their schedule. They played every game on their schedule. They had free agency that they kept on the exact same schedule. They played the NFL draft on the exact same schedule last year. And they're back to normalcy with tens of thousands of people showing up to watch the NFL draft in Cleveland. It is wild to think about how we have ended up with, I think there's a legit argument to this. The 3 biggest sports in America today are the NFL, college football, and the NFL draft. Think about that for a minute. That's how much football is dominant in this country. The 3 biggest sports are the NFL, college football, and the NFL draft. If I had to have my own draft of sports that we can talk about on this radio program, I would draft the NFL first, I would draft college football second, and I would draft the NFL draft itself third. And I would beat almost any national radio program in the country that didn't make those same 3 picks. Now, we talk about a lot of other things on this show, but how wild is that? That the draw and the popularity and the interest is to such a degree that the NFL draft is bigger than Major League Baseball, the NBA, the NHL, college basketball. Those are big sports. Lots of people care about them. But if I had to do a draft of sports to talk about on this radio program, and I only got 3 options, I would go NFL, college football, and the NFL draft. And we would dominate everybody else. Some people might go NBA. They might go Major League Baseball. They would lose to me because topic selection matters in a big way. And if you talk about the things that people care about the most, people listen. It's not rocket science. And the draft just continues to become more and more popular. By the way, if you wonder why that book didn't get published, it's because oftentimes when you are writing books, you are selling sports books to people that might not be that big of sports fans. Most New York City publishers, they don't sit around and read sports books. So they might not have caught up with the fact that the NFL draft is soaring and then it just gets more and more popular.